Hello Geometry, happy Monday, and this is going to be about three-dimensional shapes. So not a lot of algebra in this section, just more about classifying and understanding how to talk about our three-dimensional shapes before we move into surface area and volume. So first thing we're going to look at is what is a polyhedra versus what is not. It's a big fancy name. All it means is many faces. Now a face, though, is going to have straight edges. So a polyhedra will never have any circular sides. So you can see we have a prism, and what defines a prism, we're going to go into it more in a second, but notice that it has parallel, congruent faces, two parallel congruent faces as its bases. A pyramid has just one base and the sides are going to be triangles, but there are no circular edges, so it is a polyhedra. We would call this a square pyramid because the base is a square, and this would be called a rectangular prism because the bases are rectangles. Now we'll also be looking at shapes that are not polyhedra. They have circular edges. So a cylinder has two congruent circular bases. A cone has one circular base. And of course, a sphere is just like a ball. I don't know. Okay, so naming them. You use the shape of the base, and then in a prism, like I said, you will have two congruent faces that are parallel to each other, so that's going to be key to find the two that are parallel. And in a pyramid, there's going to be only one base with triangular sides. In the prism, all the sides will be rectangles. Okay, so we have to notice just some of our terminology. You have a vertex where all these sides come together, or I should say the edges come together, and then you have all the faces. Now to determine in this shape what are the bases, we're looking for two parallel congruent. So that would be the front and the back here. So you're not always sitting on your base. So since my congruent bases are trapezoids, we would call this a trapezoidal prism. So you use whatever the base is, and again, you're looking for the two congruent parallel bases. Over here, notice we have a pentagonal prism because the pentagon are the congruent parallel bases. And down here, we have a triangular prism. Since the sides are triangles, you know what a pyramid, because the base is a triangle and all the sides are also triangles. All right, so let's determine what is and what is not, and then classify it if it is. So this first one is going to be, notice you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, and you do have two parallel congruent bases, so that would be called a hexagonal prism. This next one has round edges, so it is not, but just for your information, that would be called a torus. And then C, this is not because it does have circular edges, but we can still name it. This would be called a hemisphere because it's half of a sphere. And this last one, it actually, if you look at the middle here, that is, I'm going to pretend it's a square, so I'll put the markings in there. We would call this a double square pyramid. So it's a square pyramid that goes up and goes down. So it's a double square pyramid. All right, so if you have a three-dimensional shape and you were to take a slice of it, like, you have an orange and you slice that orange in half, what would be the exposed cross-section when you opened up that sliced orange? So you can slice a shape in many different angles, And so what we're going to look at here is what would be the resulting cross section. So if I took a cube and I sliced it at an angle, if you kind of outline the shape, you can see that that would be a rectangle. If I just sliced a corner of my cube, notice that the result would be a triangle. And if I slice it parallel to the bases, it would have the same shape as my bases, which would be a square. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to be using Play-Doh, which we usually do, to kind of play with this and investigate cross sections. But I can still recommend to you guys, if you go get yourself a little thing of Play-Doh and put it into one of our polyhedra or not polyhedra shapes, get a knife, cut it at a particular angle, and you can then identify these cross sections. So now below we have named the cross section. So we have a hemisphere that's cut perpendicular to the exposed half surface. So if you outline it, which I recommend is probably the easiest way to then tell, you can see the exposed cross section would be a semicircle, half of a circle. Here we have a square pyramid that is being sliced a little bit at an angle. So again, if we kind of outline what that is, notice it's not a rectangle because one of the sides is coming out here. So that would be a trapezoid. And this last one, since we're doing it parallel to the bases, that would be the same as the bases, which is a pentagon. All right, so you are going to need to know what these cross sections, be able to identify them from a shape, and also be able to name a polyhedron or even a not polyhedron based on the bases and whether it is a prism or a pyramid. Now, something else we can do is look at a solid of revolution. The way this works, and I'll demonstrate it when we come back to class, is if I have, say, a pencil, you could do this yourself, and you tape a rectangle to the side of that pencil, and then with your hands you rotate that pencil as fast as you can in a circular motion. We want to figure out what would be the resulting shape. So realize that that edge that came out is rotating around, making a circular arc here, and so the result would be a cylinder. So we want to see what would these two shapes make. So what we would do is you're rotating it around, which, whoops, kind of went off the chart there. So it would come around like this, and this would then come around, so you can kind of hopefully see in my bad three-dimensional representation, that would end up being a cone. And hopefully you can see here, if I rotate this around, that this is going to end up being a sphere. This is why I'm not an artist. Okay, but hopefully you can tell from that. It's actually a nice little exercise. Just cut out a shape, put it on a pencil, and kind of rub it between your two hands. And if you do it really quickly, you can tell what that shape is.